So hi, Gina Ornelas.
Hi, Angel.
I'm super excited that you agreed to do this lounge chat with me. This is one of my favorite topics, EMDR. You are like the bomb.com, super like special, oh my gosh, amazingly talented EMDR therapist, specialist, whatever. You can share your title, but I just am like super excited for people to get to number one, hear what EMDR is, and number
Awesome.
two, us to have a discussion in that, like just to, kind of share some of the things that you taught me as far as like what it does for people. And
Sure.
I tell people, oh, I had EMDR. They have no clue, like no clue what it is. They hadn't
Yeah.
heard. So why don't you share who you are and what EMDR is? And I'd love to know too about like what made you so passionate about it, in your
Oh,
own life.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever told you the story of even how I got into it now that I think about it.
I don't think I know that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. And I became a therapist because I felt like that was kind of a natural gifting of mine to sit with people, to listen to people. And so I went to Fuller Seminary in Pasadena and I was like all gung ho to, see clients and whatnot. And I got into my practicum and later my internship site, and 80% of my clients were victims of domestic violence. So I was just around traumatized people 24/7. And I was very disappointed in the level of care I was giving.
Mm.
And I'm not trying to be down on myself. I don't feel like I was a bad therapist. I mean, I was a young therapist, but I didn't see people heal. I saw people leave abusers. I saw people cope, but they still had their trauma triggers and they were walking around very wounded. And I really didn't know where to go from there. And my friend Susan, who worked with me at the time, still works with me on the other side of this wall. She was seeing a therapist at the time that did this weird thing called EMDR. And I was like, that feels like not okay. That's like some weird hippy dippy. I don't even know. I don't know. It just kind of freaked me out. But I ended up with the same therapist, not for anything major, but just because therapists should be in therapy.
Yeah. Wow.
And I came into her office one time crying about an embarrassing moment I had had in jury duty. So what happened to me in jury duty in downtown LA was I was like in the jury box and they're interviewing us. And I got very nervous and I told a lie. Because I was just, now I understand why people give false confessions. I got nervous and I told a lie, and that was really out of character and I was really mad at myself. And then my husband had just done jury duty, and how he told me it worked was that he had like 3 rounds of questions.
Oh.
So I was expecting them to come back around and ask me another set of questions, and all of a sudden they're swearing us in. And I'm like, oh, no. I can't be on a murder jury. I've got a job and like other things to do. And I literally had like an anxiety attack in the juror's box. So the attorney and the judge pull me aside, and now I'm like this hysterical therapist. And so I'm obviously unfit to serve. So we come back, and in front of the jury and the potential jurors, which is like, I don't know, in my memory, it's like 100 people. It probably wasn't that much. He was like, I thought we had a jury. I guess we don't. And people were furious at me. Furious.
Oh my gosh.
So in the whole span of my life, is this the worst thing that's ever happened to me? No, but I couldn't let go of it. And every time I drove past downtown LA, which I had to for work, I would get this pit in my stomach and I would relive it.
Okay. Wow. Which was hard for you because you really do care about people and that whole thing.
Yes. And I care as much as I try not to. I care what people think of me. And so I would try and tell myself things like, you're never going to see those people again, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't sinking in. So back to my therapist at the time, she goes, well, let's do EMDR for it. And I go, that's for trauma. This isn't trauma. And she goes, well, you keep crying about it. And I was like, okay, fine. And the next time I drove past downtown, I only thought about my jury duty experience after I'd already passed it. And it was kind of like, oh, well. And so I
Yeah,
was
it
like,
was
oh
like
my gosh.
no crazy response or reaction like from that experience.
Yeah, no crazy response.
Wow.
So then my husband and I moved to Fresno. I had my daughter. We were living with my parents, saving money for a house. And I was working in a private practice setting at the Well Counseling Center. And even though my clients didn't have the same like level of trauma, I still felt like, I know what it's like to have a trauma resolved now, and I've got to offer this. So
Yeah.
I put it on a credit card back in the day and got trained in EMDR. That was 10 years ago. Last month, actually, it was 10 years ago.
Wow.
And when I first started, I didn't have any colleagues that knew EMDR. And so I was just sharing my results with my clients, with people. And then they started to get trained. And then they started to ask me for advice, even though I was still being trained. And that's how my consultation practice started. So when it comes to EMDR, we do a basic training just to be able to do it, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if a therapist is serious about it, you can become what's called a certified EMDR therapist, which just means that you've had even more continuing education. You've had more consultation. That just means that the International Association is saying, yes, you take it seriously. And then there was no consultant from Sacramento to LA. There was no one in the Central Valley to do the consultation piece that people were needing. And so I just kind of filled a role that no one was in. So about a third of my practice is consultation. So that means that when people get trained in EMDR, or they're seeking certification, or they're trying to be a consultant like I am, that they come to me individually or in groups, and I help them work out their hard cases. It's a lot of problem solving.
Like a trainer of trainers kind of a thing.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And
Yeah.
EMDR stands for what? For people
Oh,
who have no idea what it stands for, what does it stand for?
it stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And you never have to remember that.
Yeah, right.
I
EMDR.
mean, we're stuck with the name of it, but
Yeah.
that's
And
what it
really
is.
like for me, because Gina Beckman, right? My
Yeah.
spiritual mama, but also counselor over 30 years, therapist. And I mean, she is how I came to know about you. And I had been spending a lot of time with her and then in me working with my clients and things like that. And she had been talking about EMDR, EMDR. And I was like, well, I don't need EMDR because I haven't had trauma. In my head, that's what I thought, right? Because
Oh, Rachel.
I had, right? Oh my gosh, was I so clueless? Like, oh my gosh. Well, and in all honesty, I had done so much work, like in what I know, the soul work and stuff like that, spirit work and all that, around like the domestic violence, because I was in 4 very abusive relationships from 14 to 23.
Sure.
And so, progression of that. But I had done so much work that I felt really good about it. Well, little did I know. And Gina had told me, she says, Angel, she goes, there's patterns for you that I really think that you would benefit. And what I loved was that when I met you, first of all, I didn't realize the level of PTSD that I had. I did not realize, and let me just share with the people watching this video, the reason why I started going to you, number one, was because Gina started sharing with me these gaps, which I want you to explain in a minute, like where our brain is not connecting, our mind is not connecting. So she started identifying the dissociation, like the places that I was dissociating. And she started identifying those patterns. But when she would try to share it with me, I didn't understand what she was saying. So I was like, yeah, I don't think I need that, and I wasn't resisting her. It wasn't landing for me.
Yeah.
But then in doing all my work, I had a period where I started having body responses and then images of being raped at 5, or at a young age. And then so I was so confused because here I was 42 at the time. And now all of a sudden there's this reality. And I remember standing in the shower and I all of a sudden was like, oh my God. And I had the body sensations and the images all flood in. And then I just started sobbing because it was a reality that I just knew. And it was like, wait a minute, that meant my whole life, all these things that everybody was like, you're so this and you're so that. And I was like, there's a reason. Like it
Yeah.
just clicked, right? And so I immediately called Gina and I was like, I was raped as a little girl. And she just felt the truth in it. And we both were just like, oh my God. Well, at that point, I was way over my head, right? And for so many reasons. And that's when I reached out to you. And so, share a little bit about what that is when someone
Mm.
goes through something and for all those years they have no recollection of something very traumatic like that, or even, whatever the level of trauma, but that their memory, they don't remember it consciously.
Yeah. So you're talking about a pretty extreme form of dissociation. And all traumatic memories have a certain level of that. And our creator created it this way because if we touch a hot stove, that's a trauma, right? Like I
Yeah.
burnt my hand, and my brain has to remember not to do that again.
Yeah.
Okay. So it becomes what's called an isolated neural network.
Mm.
And basically, it's like frozen in time. Well, when we're really itty bitty, our brains are so sophisticated and moldable and shapeable that when something really traumatic happens, we can totally file it away and not think about it again. And that's really a protective measure. I think dissociation gets a bad rap, right? So,
Right.
Angel, for you, what would your life have looked like if you would have had access to that memory?
Oh yeah, it protected me in a
It
way. I mean,
protected you.
truly, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And when I see people that have early developmental trauma like that, or I'll say this, when I get clients that have a high level of dissociation, meaning they don't spend a lot of time in their body, they can't get what they want out of life and they don't know why, they're not very present.
Yeah.
I know there's some memories that we're going to
Yeah.
uncover because
Find,
their
right?
level of symptoms doesn't match the trauma that
Hmm.
they're giving me. And then those get revealed layer by layer and we process them. So EMDR actually wasn't even necessarily created for that level of trauma. When it came about, we as a field at least had PTSD as a diagnosis. And so EMDR was for very specific things, like maybe a natural disaster or a car accident. And it was only as it developed further and further that people started using it for more complex issues like you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we, kept growing into it. But um, I don't know if that answers your question, but
It
basically,
does.
yeah.
And what really, for me, the biggest part where the EMDR supported me so much after the initial like shock of, oh my God, and it was someone very close to me. So
Yeah.
that, I mean, that was crazy in itself. But for me, and I think, and you, I'm sure you remember that this was even later, was that he's coming to get me. He's coming to get me. The PTSD from that and still living in that as an unconscious reality, in that like fight or flight, he's coming to get me, he's coming to get me, and multiple like layers of what that did, right? And I'm always talking about the soul, spirit, body, heart, mind, and will,
Yeah.
all that in addition to that. And so for me, it was the PTSD of that. And then what blew my mind was when we started doing the work in what I didn't get, like you said, developmentally, but then also like how I wasn't nurtured, how I wasn't like, somebody being very tender and saying, what do you need, honey? How do you feel? Because I didn't get that,
Mhm.
then there was more, I'll say, damage, right? From that. And then you helping. So can you talk about that a little bit about when
Yeah.
someone's lacking that?
Okay. So when we're little and we're not getting our needs met, or we're having actual acute abuse like you experienced, what our nervous system does is it learns to turn away from that fight and flight so we can go to school, so we can make friends,
Yeah.
and so we can grow up and get a job, get married, do all these things. And that turning away grows and grows and grows over time. So I can't just go in there and do EMDR for somebody who isn't in what we call the window of tolerance.
Mm.
Okay. So if we're above the window of tolerance, oh, look, I have a picture of it right here. This is a
Oh,
picture of the
cool.
window of tolerance. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
So our nervous system, um, naturally, feelings go up and down, emotions go up and down. But when we're in this window of tolerance, I like to call it the window of presence, actually.
Oh,
We can be
yeah.
present in it, and it's not necessarily terrible. Like, we can cope. Okay. When a trauma happens or a trauma is triggered, we're outside the window of tolerance. We go up into this hyper arousal, fight and flight.
Oh, yes.
Well, we can only stay there for so long, right? So then we plummet into this hypo arousal or numb collapse. Now, people that have had chronic trauma, their window is really small.
Wow.
So they live here or here.
Yeah.
And so before I can actually process their memories, I've got to do some things to widen their window. So Angel, that's what we're talking about. For you, your window needed to be widened because you had chronic neglect, right?
Yeah.
So EMDR has 8 phases to it. I don't need everybody to know what they are.
Right.
But before we get to the memory processing phase, I have to take a history and make sure I know where we're going. And I also have to do preparation. And so when you talked about how we installed some good things for you, that's what you're talking about, is the preparation.
Yeah.
So do you want me to kind of talk about that neurologically?
Can you? Because I really, what I think is great, what a lot of people don't understand is when those things are not connecting, and then EMDR really bridges all that, when you've expanded the window and now you're exchanging. Can you, that process? Yeah.
So I have a way that I see it in my mind, because I'm not naturally a scientific person. So the fact that I understand it means anybody can understand it. Okay. And so I'm going to use this board.
I love it.
Okay.
I love it.
So in EMDR, we have this term called adaptive information processing. So what that means is that our brain can adapt and process and change. And that's what I'm going to explain right now.
Okay, cool.
So the theory is that our good memories, see, I have a happy face here, and our bad memories are stored differently in our brains. Okay. So let's say we have some good memories here. And these are these little circles. And all of these good memories have neural pathways between each other. Right? So that means that I can glide between the memory of being in the backyard with my dad, to my first kiss, to getting an A on a test, to my babies being born, getting married, whatever. But then sometimes I get clients where the birth of a child isn't stored this way. It's stored like this. And I don't know if this is necessarily true, that it takes up more space in the brain, but it sure feels like it does.
Yeah, right.
And what we do know is that it's an isolated neural network. And so what that means is there's these walls on the trauma, right? And so we don't want to think about that memory, because we're going to get stuck on it. And when we get stuck in that memory, it loops and loops and loops. We have nightmares, we have hypervigilance. And it's because this traumatic memory does not know the time and place we're in right now, right? I once processed a different
reality. That is a different reality.
Think about veterans that come home and hear a car backfire and think that it's machine gun fire. That's because that memory network doesn't know that they're not in Iraq anymore.
Wow.
Okay. So I one time did a memory for an 85-year-old client. It was something that happened when she was 5. And it was as if it was happening in the moment when we accessed that. Because when she landed on that, it was like it was happening all over again. So the miracle of EMDR is that it does this.
It really does. And I can vouch for that, because I'm living proof. Like that whole he's coming for me, he's coming for me. Like that loop, after all that came out, you helped me to bridge to that other side where I could get off the loop and then get out of that hypervigilance.
Yes, because you went from I'm not safe, I can't take care of myself, to I am safe and I do take care of myself. Another example of that is, say I get a client in who was molested as a child, and their biggest issue is shame. All right. And they come in, and 9 times out of 10, they'll say something like, I know it wasn't my fault, right? Because this adaptive adult perspective over here, that's wise and has had lots of good nurturing experiences, is telling them it's not your fault. But the trauma memory is like, it is your fault. You wanted this. You wore a short skirt and you asked for it. And there's no bridge there. And they go, I know it wasn't my fault, but I feel like it's my fault. Why is that?
Yeah.
It's because this has not connected yet. So after EMDR, they look at the same memory and they go, well, of course it wasn't my fault. I was 7.
Yeah.
Duh.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Here's the problem that you had and that other clients have is sometimes I get clients in that don't have very many good nurturing memories or attachment figures, right? They've just got a few. It's this little network. And then they have, in clinical terms, a crap ton
Yes.
of
Yes.
trauma. And so I look at their trauma history and I go, well, what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
Then I've got to go in there and do with my movements of EMDR, some resourcing to where you believe that you're lovable and you have compassion for yourself.
Like laying a foundation, like a new foundation to draw
Yes.
from.
That's exactly what it is. Actually, my mentor, Phil Manfield, that created a kind of resourcing I do called dyadic resourcing. He calls it a foundation for trauma processing. Because as he learned EMDR in the very beginning of EMDR, he would have complex trauma cases and he's moving their eyes and nothing's happening because there's nothing to bridge to.
There's like no registry, nothing to grab onto.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So EMDR can be really easy. Like say you have a lot of resources, a lot of adaptive adult perspective, you have compassion for yourself and other people, but you get into a terrible car accident and you can't drive anymore. Well, then you come in and that's going to take a session or two because you have this one big thing, but lots of good stuff to draw on.
Yeah.
But that's not my average client. And I don't think it's your average client either.
No, it's definitely not. And it's funny because like how you're talking about cognitively, all of the exchanging, when you do the soul work and the spirit work, it's very similar. It's just a different layer, but they're all interconnected and it's so amazing. And, you and I've enjoyed working with you because I've, get to see that coming together. I want to talk a little bit too about like, this last experience I had where I got really sick and I've done some videos sharing about that and how I was so frustrated because it was like, okay, I'm eating right. I've done all this work. Why is this happening? And that level of PTSD really took me to where we did the attachment therapy.
Yeah.
And that was so significant because like for me, the attachment therapy was that my baby, I was actually kind of driving her insane because I was in that hypervigilance panic, but my baby had that no foundation to grab onto in the way of that experience from being like super nurtured and I just didn't have that. And so can you talk a little bit about that part of it and just the importance of building that bridge in that way?
Well, part of this bridge that we build neurologically isn't just in the brain, it's in the body. And that's what separates EMDR from more cognitive therapies. Now, when I learned EMDR 10 years ago, I really felt like we were the only therapy that was working on trauma stored in the body. And that's not true now. Now I know there's somatic experiencing, there's cranial sacral work, there's a lot of people are really understanding how trauma is stored in the body, right? That's why when I would drive past downtown LA, as stupid as that trauma was, I would have a pit in my stomach.
Feel it. Yeah.
Yes, I felt that same shame and embarrassment. Okay.
Yeah.
So for you, your baby part did not have enough nurturing and what we call attunement. So she, your baby part of you, did not feel safe in the world. So we had to, and I say we because I brought in my colleague, Natalie Garvey, who does another really hippy dippy therapy
I love
called
it.
somatic
It's
blueprint.
amazing stuff.
It's amazing. She's like a wizard with what she does.
Yeah.
But basically what we did was we gave you an experience that your baby needed, and then that got installed
Yes.
into your being.
Because I had nothing there. I had nothing
No.
to draw from. Like when we went into it, the image that I got was that I was in a dark room all by myself crying and no one was coming for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
And
the
so,
reality that I was living in as a grown woman in an adult state, but my child was very actively present in my reality, or like I was in that reality a lot of the time, right?
yes. And so, because that was more than likely your reality as an infant, you learned that the world was not safe. No one's coming to meet my needs. And so that infant grows into adult that says, I can't expect anybody to meet my needs, and the world is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn through repetition. So I have 2 kids, and they're not babies anymore. They're 7 and 11.
Wow.
But I don't know how many times they cried, and James and I would come get them, pick them up. What's wrong? And meet a need.
Mm-hmm.
And that repetition, hopefully we gave them enough repetition of that they feel safe in the world.
Yeah.
And they learned what they feel is real. Because if I look at my infant and I go, nothing's wrong with you, then my infant goes, I guess what I'm feeling isn't real.
Right. It doesn't like validate or affirm what they're experiencing.
Right. And so when I look at my infant and I go, oh, I can see you're sad, they go, yes, I am sad. And now they know that what they're feeling is real because I'm marrying it with my own face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a lot of the work that we did, right? Was working on those neural pathways just in our relationship, but adding in the bilateral stimulation to create that foundation that what you feel is actually real and valid.
And I remember one time you told me when I was talking about the rape and all of that. And at that time, I didn't know I was molested until I was 10. I just knew I had these big chunks of my childhood where I had no memory, like just completely no memory. And I remember you telling me in the beginning, because a lot of the knowing about the rape came through the manifestations in my body, right? Those active. And so I remember sitting there and you said, it's really even irrelevant at this point, because I was still kind of in shock, but you're like, because your body is expressing, you know what I mean? So my body was needing to release that. And that was what was important, because it was intense, like overwhelming.
Well, that's the beauty of EMDR is I don't need to know exactly what happened to you. In fact,
I love that. Yeah.
In fact, I don't want to know. And that's hard for me because I'm naturally curious. I always want to know people's stories and the details of it. But when you just tell me your traumatic story and we're not processing it, all we're doing is creating an even stronger neural pathway of disturbance.
Right.
And so when I take somebody's history, I tell them I want the headlines, not the story. I don't want the story until we're actually processing it. And even then, I don't need to know the details. I don't need to know how old you were, who your perpetrator was, exactly what he or she did. All I need to know is what is the picture of the memory that bothers you? What is the belief about yourself that bothers you?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not safe. I'm out of control.
I'm bad.
I'm worthless. I'm bad.
Yeah.
And where you feel that in your body. And for really early trauma, like for your baby part, we didn't even need a cognition because babies don't have cognitions. They just have feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sensation. I would say they have sensations more than actual emotions.
Yeah.
And then we process that.
I think it was amazing because even though like you, and this is kind of how when I do work with people, they don't necessarily know it or feel it right then and there. But what I love is that you just start knowing it's different and you're different. And you just like, I remember after the attachment therapy, like I just woke up and it was like I had a more solid anchoring within my being that just was a reality. I didn't have to try to create it or believe it or positive reinforce it with thought. It just was a truth, and it really is something, and it's beautiful because like Gina Beckman, she knows the old method of EMDR And then she, with her intuitive gifting, we've done a lot of stuff like recently we did one where taking me off the loop of hypervigilance, in that I had to like protect everybody from everything,
Right.
and it's just so amazing to me how it's so real. These methods are so simple and so real. A lot of people think it's going to be this horrific experience or it's going to be
Yeah.
super hard. It's not. It's fast and it's deep and it's real. And then you go through this progression of I'm better, but it's through your knowing, and it's through your everyday that it's like the proof is in the pudding. You don't need someone
Well,
to
the
convince.
beauty of it, and the difference of EMDR between EMDR and like a cognitive behavioral therapy is somebody that's gone through, a cognitive type therapy goes, when I think about my trauma, I just decide to think differently about it. And they're constantly reframing it and practicing that. And then someone that's had EMDR goes, I don't think about that anymore.
Yeah,
And so
it's just not there.
it's just not there. And so
Different.
people
Yeah.
that come to me that have had a lot of talk therapy, they're like, so what's my homework? And I go enjoy your brain.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? There's not the efforting.
That's what I
In getting
loved
done.
about it. I
Yeah.
loved that about it. It worked for me because I've done talk therapy, almost my whole life, and I never benefited from it. I know it has its place, and I know, there are some really great therapists, but for me, it didn't work. But because I didn't know, I needed to get into all these other roots before any of that. It didn't have a place. It was just like, I was on the surface. You know what I mean? I
Well,
wasn't.
for complex developmental trauma, I'm going to say something very controversial here, but it can actually be detrimental and cause harm.
Yeah.
And the reason is that if somebody with a lot of early trauma goes to therapy and starts talking about it, guess what happens? They are re-traumatizing themselves, and they're actually learning to dissociate, because now the therapy office itself is this scary thing where I have to come in and feel all these things, and then we start dreading therapy.
Yeah.
Right?
Not to mention they lack the knowledge in this. So they're sitting there and they're telling you, like for me, I interpreted it that something was wrong with me because I couldn't accomplish the homework or what it was that they were wanting me to do.
Oh, when my husband saw a cognitive behavioral therapist, I honestly really believe that it made it worse, because he felt such shame that he couldn't remember to do the homework because no one diagnosed him with ADHD. Sorry, I mean, I did not tell him that I was going to talk about. He doesn't. Oh well, he'll never know. He'll be fine.
No one knows who he is, right? So
and it helped him dissociate.
Yeah.
He would come home and I'd go, "What did you talk about in therapy?" And he's like, "I don't know." And so, and it was a genuine, it was so disturbing. And his brain, because of his child, had learned to turn away from all these things. And at that point, I didn't know any better. So I just kept encouraging him to go. And he just got more and more anxious and more dissociated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was actually, it did harm.
Yeah. And I really believe, right? Like I would not have that all of that came up about that trauma for me as a little girl, if I wasn't in a place where I could handle it, or prepared to deal with it, I don't believe that it would have come up because I had been doing so much work before. And
That's
what
right.
I've learned just in what I have done with myself, and then also I say myself with the Lord and what he's taught me, and then also with working with people, is that progression, that order of the onion, so to speak, there's
very
purpose
important
in that. And like you even told me, it has to be respected. And I learned that, like, and I think this is why I was really glad how I came into all of this, because there was this level of honor in, okay, you don't go probing around, you don't go digging, and just because you can see something in the spirit or whatever, and working in that with me, I wasn't going to touch it. You know what I mean? It was like, no. And I think that's where our being, our created being, knows, right? It's only going to offer what it's able to do or willing to do. If people go probing and okay, well, when did that happen? Or like you said, you don't need to know all the specific details. And I know there's a lot of people in the community of healers that they go digging and probing, and then that person can get stuck in that, and so it's not to be messed with. And I know, just in from what I've done with you, what I've done with Gina Beckman, and what I've learned, it's like this is not to be taken lightly. You know what I mean? That the level of PTSD and those loops, we're already unconsciously stuck in those loops, but people can get very consciously stuck in them also, right?
Well, and it can increase the dissociation.
Yeah.
So if you had gone to a therapist that was like, tell me all your traumas, that's just going to increase you habitually looking away from them.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And I have made that mistake as a therapist before. And I've made that mistake in the beginning of being an EMDR therapist, processing someone's trauma without laying a good enough foundation. And I increased their dissociation, and then had to talk to my mentor and go, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
So it's not just, I think that we think of EMDR as like, oh, a therapist goes to 2 weekend trainings, does some consultation, and then they're great at it. Well, no, they can do basic trauma, but to do complex dissociation, developmental trauma takes quite a level of skill of knowing when we're actually ready to process. How do we know we've laid a good enough foundation?
Yeah.
And I will tell you this. So I learned EMDR 10 years ago. I became a consultant in 2014. So I was like the youngest consultant, I think, ever. I think it was like 32 or something like that. Because I was just so passionate about it. And I did not learn any other therapy for 7 years.
Wow.
And so when other therapists come to me and they say, I don't feel like I'm very good at EMDR, and then they tell me, well, I did this IFS workshop and I'm working on my EFT certification, I'm like, well, you're not going to get good at anything if you're learning everything. So as a clinician, we do have to make a choice of like, what are we really going to learn to do and do it well? And I chose EMDR, and I'm really glad, because I think
I'm glad
we see results.
I'm glad too. And both Gina and we love you so much. I want to share a little bit about, because there's so many ways in which this benefits people. And I just want to make sure we talk about my recent issue when I went through that whole hormonal thing and all this other like the deeper root stuff that was happening, and I couldn't eat, and I was having these allergic reactions to all the food I was eating, and I wasn't taking in nutrients, and I got super thin, and I was really scared. One of the things that happened in that is that I started having the PTSD around eating. So I was decreasing the amount of foods that I was able to eat, because I was so afraid that
I would say you were phobic. It wasn't necessarily PTSD, but you had developed a phobia.
Yeah, because it was so like, I was so terrified that, okay, if I put this in my mouth, and even in 2014, when I got really sick, I had started having allergic reactions to food then. And so I stopped eating gluten, dairy, sugar then. And because if I would eat anything like that, or something with caffeine or something, right away, I'd have a physical response that was really scary. And so when I had this recently, it really triggered some of those things that I was able to manage before, but because I was in this vulnerable state, I wasn't able to manage it. Well, what I love is that I shared that with you, and I was like, I need to increase what I'm eating, because I was so thin, and I was like, I needed the nutrients. And you taught me the flash technique, where you want to talk about that and why it worked so well in disrupting?
Well, I'll talk about it, but here's the thing. We really don't know why flash technique works yet. So let me give you the background of it. So my mentor, Phil Manfield, that taught me EMDR, I want to say it was in 2016. He developed this technique as a way of helping people when a trauma is really, really disturbing and they don't want to go there. So we call it a titration technique, but I guess that might not even be relevant. So that's what he thought he was doing, was easing someone into the trauma. And that's why we named it Flash over drinks at Pismo's.
I love it.
Because at that time,
right?
at that time, we would have people just flash on the traumatic memory. really quick and then distract them. And now it's become this thing where we really don't want you to think of the memory at all. So how it goes is, say you come in and you're like, Gina, I had a trauma last week. My coworker yelled at me. And I'll be like, oh, your coworker yelled at you? Okay, well, let's not think about that. And then we do bilateral stimulation through tapping back and forth as a way of just getting these hemispheres connected. And I'll distract you. I'll play music. I'll talk to you, or you'll tell me a story, or you'll think of a pretty nature scene that has you totally distracted from the trauma. Mm-hmm. But the trauma has been put in the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain for working memory, and it's being processed without us even knowing it. And then we do blinking to kind of break it up. Yeah. Okay, so we're in the early stages of flash technique, and research is happening, but we still don't know exactly how it works, but that will eventually come. Yeah. And it's kind of morphing as it goes. So what I realized is that when it comes to food sensitivities, because I've known a few people with them, I've had a couple clients with them, what I think is happening is that your brain is creating a phobia of those foods or chemical sensitivities, things like that. And that's what happened to you, Angel, because your nervous system was in this hyper aroused state. And for some reason, this food thing happened. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was we said, how fearful are you to eat blah, blah, blah. I don't remember what it was.
It was everything at that point, because we did even my Dandy Blend drink, and I was taking that, I was sipping it, and then I was taking bigger drinks and then doing the flash. But it was like with everything, because I had such those allergic reactions. It was like, I felt like my throat was going to close up, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Everything was, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Right. I'm going to die.
And here's the thing. Flash technique was not developed for any kind of sensitivities. As far as I know, I'm still the only one that's tried it. Oh no, that's not true. I have one consultee who started trying it with her clients and having success. So this was something I tried on a client just because I was like, she's not eating anything. What do we have to lose?
Yes.
And it worked.
It worked.
So then I used it. So you were the second person I tried it on. But Phil wants me to eventually do it on more people and then write a paper on it.
I think it was amazing. And I was so glad, because you know me, I'm all about like, hey, try it on me, right? Because I just feel safe enough to do that. And so it was like, try it on me. But I remember when I came home that day, and I don't remember what it is that I was trying to eat, but I was trying to actually eat like food, because at that point I was like pureeing my food. And so I was trying to eat. And I remember when I came home and I was sitting in front of the TV, and I was like, okay, I really want to eat. But I started getting that anxiety, right? And that hyper, like where I started getting all freaked out. And so I started doing that. And then I took a bite. And then it went down, and then I started getting panicked again. And then I took another bite, and it worked. I mean, I only had to do it maybe for a day and a half, and I was eating. Because by that point, my body was ready to take it in. It was my mind that was then just really interfering.
And what you were processing and what we were measuring is how fearful of you are how fearful are you of this food?
Yes.
So then we would work on it until the fear was zero. You'd take a bite. Now, how fearful are you that you're going to react?
Yes.
And then we would do that. And that was really just me kind of playing around with it. But I think doing it that way is working. So we'll see where it goes.
So well. And it was fast and easy. And then because you taught me that, and then you explained, you kind of prefaced it where you're disrupting that thought, right? And so I think I did it on a couple other things in that time where I was having so much anxiety. It helped with everything I tried it on. Everything I tried it on. It didn't matter what it was that I was, afraid of or having a reaction to. And when I did that, it just broke up my mind from going down that spiral. And it really helped. Yeah. So
well, if anybody's watching this that's interested in either being trained in flash technique, even if you're a therapist and you're not trained in EMDR, Phil will still train you in flash technique because we believe in it so much.
Yeah.
Go to flashtechnique.com, and there is a little place on there where it's like find a therapist, and you can put in your zip code and find people that are trained in flash in your area.
Oh, nice. And can you tell, because you actually it's the Resilience Center, right? The name of it?
We have a group that's called Resilience Counseling Group. So basically I just wanted to work with my friends. And so we all decided that it was more fun to work together than work in offices by ourselves. And we ended up naming it Resilience because my friend Sherry and I were on a plane to an EMDR conference, couldn't decide on a name. And we asked a guy next to us on the plane, what should we name our group? And he said Resilience. You know what's funny? I had thought of that name and then I was like, no, I don't really like that. But when Dave on the plane said it, I was like, yeah, that's our name. That's our name. So yeah, there's 6 of us. And we're all independent. So, you know, we don't do business together, but we share a space and we share ideas and we care for each other.
Yeah.
Because our job is hard
works
sometimes.
in your office. Natalie, the one that did the attachment therapy also, she works in your office.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited because I think more people need to learn about EMDR. It's not something that, you know, like, I guess some people think, oh, well, do I have to do it forever? No, I mean, it is a process. You do have to be, for me, I wanted to commit to the process. I wanted to be willing for you to be the expert and to do what I needed to do and identify all that stuff. It's so funny. I know this is kind of vulgar, but it's my truth. By the last time I had seen you, I remember telling you, it's shocking that I'm not a hooker off the street. Like, I am not even kidding, because I did not know at 38 years old when I had my breakdown that I had the level of trauma. I knew the domestic violence. Obviously, I was an adult when I did that, you know, but I didn't know under, you know, 10 years old what had all the things that that had happened. And so I was so thankful, number one, for Gina and her awareness and knowledge and all her wisdom and what she had experienced in doing that. And then when she introduced me to you, and then I've been so blessed. So I just want people to know about it because, you know, it's more effective therapy, I feel, than most of what is offered out there. And it's amazing. I really do believe that.
I do too. And if anybody's looking for an EMDR therapist, you can go to emdria.org. I think it's emdria.org, which is EMDR International Association. And you click on find a therapist. And I suggest refining your search to a certified therapist. Because again, that certification means that someone didn't just flippantly take a training, but they've really taken it seriously, done extra consultation. And the EMDR International Association is saying, we certify this person, they're good at what they do.
Yeah,
so
I think that's very important, because just going through with you and everything we did and the vulnerability that you're in when you're in that therapy, and also what the work that's being done, you really, number one, have to have a rapport with the person, feel good about the relationship, and the fit. Like you and I just had such a great fit. At least I felt that way.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And also, though, that it's someone that knows what they're doing, because it's no joke, and it really is serious work, but it's simple and effective. And so I'm so thankful to you after working a day and taking the time to do this, because I'm going to post it on my Facebook, my YouTube, and share it. And so, is it okay if I put just the name of your group there so that they can have the name of your group?
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
It's Resilience Counseling Group. And thank you for letting me talk about the thing that I love to talk about the most.
Oh, I'm so thankful you wanted to, and that you were willing, because I really believe that people need to learn about the resources that we have in how we can support the body, the mind, the soul, the spirit, the heart, right? In getting back to its natural state, so that we can live in harmony, really. Right? Yeah, cool. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now.
All right. Thank you, Angel.